Hello, and welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. I am Brandon Tessers. I'm a licensed therapist. This is Caitlin Miller, who is also a licensed therapist. But this is not therapy for very, very many reasons. Usually we're joined by Marie Moran. Unfortunately, she's not feeling well today, so she won't be with us. It'll just be the two of us. This is not therapy. It is just an open conversation that we're here talking with each other and with any of you who are watching, especially if you join in the chat. We have our imaginings of who you are and what you might be interested in, because that's the only way people can communicate, is to imagine what other people might be wanting to hear or how they would be impacted. Yeah. But if you're in the chat, then we have more information instead of just having to guess. So that's nice. We always pick a topic, except we didn't today, but that's okay. We'll find one. But we'll go wherever. If you're here in the chat and you have questions or thoughts, the point of conversation is that we're impacted by one another. We're impacted by, I've got the chat up here without Marie. Marie usually will relay things to us, but instead I'll be seeing things directly. And we'll go wherever. So Caitlin and I will be talking about whatever we end up talking about. We'll find that out soon. But we'll change that and follow wherever the chat goes. It can be questions, but it doesn't have to just be a question and answer kind of format. It
could be a riddle.
Yeah, I like riddles, actually. I quite enjoy riddles.
Yeah, they're fun.
Man, things free and wild today, yeah. Things already, just riddles. We could talk about riddles, ciphers, language, paradoxes. So I'm going to be stepping away in just a second to pour some tea. Do you want to why don't I go do that, and you can say about effective artistry and what we do?
Yeah, we are a group therapy practice located in Northbrook, Illinois. We have a group of therapists who can do therapy. They're licensed in the state of Illinois, so we can do therapy in the state of Illinois. And then we also have coaches, executive functioning coaches, who work with neurodivergent folks all over the world. So if you are not in the state of Illinois and are interested in coaching, you can work with us there. And everyone who works here identifies as neurodivergent. I love working here, and we'd be happy to hear from you. So there we go.
I put just slightly too little water into the tea kettle, which is very frustrating.
Oh, no.
I know.
What a bummer.
Okay. What do you want to talk about?
Let's see. The riddle.
The riddle of the human mind? Yeah, kind of.
Okay.
I mean, I've got to be careful about how I use language on stream, just because you can't always clarify it with people. But one way I have described myself and have found useful language to offer to other people is that some autistic people, special interest is a term related to autism, right? Well, some people's special interest is communication, or is the human experience, or what it is to be conscious, or we could lump all that together in metaphysical philosophy or moral philosophy. I'm gesturing at Caitlin because Caitlin likes moral philosophy. I tend to be more interested in metaphysical philosophy.
Just give me a couple years and I'll be over it. I'll truly believe that there is no right and wrong, and then we can just talk about metaphysical or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, riddle. I mean, nobody.
It is a riddle.
It's like a universal thing for humans that we don't enjoy being aware of the fact that there's something we don't understand, but which can theoretically be understood. So most of the time we're just not aware. Like, obviously, theoretically, we are at all times. There's infinite things that could be understood that we don't understand, but we're just not aware of that. So we don't experience that distress. Yeah. But when something is called to our attention that could be understood, but that doesn't, there's a little bit of distress inherent with that, until you say, yeah, I don't really care about that. Which we do all the time.
I think one of the fun things about, I guess it's fun for me, but probably not for most people, about therapy is that people are constantly bringing things to me that I'm like, I don't know. That's new.
Yeah.
So it's like a profession where you're constantly, I feel like doctors might feel that way too, maybe. I don't know, that might be a bad example.
They might, but it is a different thing for sure, because with medicine, which therapy is not, not even remotely. Psychiatry is medicine, and medicine is a useful lens through which to look at and approach people's conscious experiences.
You don't have any biases. You're like, oh, I want to say it, but I'm not going to.
Well, because the phrase that people would typically use, and that I would typically use because I know it's the phrase people would typically use, is mental health. That I would have said mental health there. But I don't like that phrase. I use it because it's the phrase that most people use, but when we're on the stream, there's a place for me to be able to kind of be more precise and explore things in the way that I think is useful to explore it. That was the hesitation. I mean, the fact that it is difficult to even come up with a way of talking about this field or this facet of the human experience without referencing mental health or mental illness, the fact that that is difficult is telling.
There's a comment that says show.
Oh, that's because the mouse is hovering over it. The thing I love about the field of city planning is you're not only constantly learning new things, but you're also constantly working with people in a wide variety of fields who are well versed in things you don't know. Yeah, that's awesome. I felt the same way about acting when I was acting. I remember, the source of this is just funny to me, so I'm going to say it. It's from a behind the scenes, you know, like how DVDs used to have the like commentary and whatever.
Yeah, that was fun.
It was a behind the scenes, like with commentary from Charlie's Angels 2 or Charlie's Angels 3, one of those. And it was Lucy Liu talking about how part of what they enjoy about acting is they get to learn new things. There was some scene where they were like welding something and they had to learn how to do some of that. And that always stuck with me. I don't know why. I don't even know why I was watching that on a Charlie's Angels. Like, those are not movies I think highly of. It was at the time I worked at Blockbuster. I might have just been seeing lots of random stuff.
Yeah. Anyway. Yeah, that reminds me, I grew up in a town with lots of actors. There's a great theater there. And they would say similar things. Like, even if it's just the feelings or experiences of a character versus, like, skills. Like, now I'm a plumber for 10 minutes on a show.
Yeah, it's a way to step into it. I mean, acting and therapy, I think, draw on a lot of the same skill sets. Obviously, very different ones as well. But
it's like an art, but also a science. Ooh,
well, it's a skill.
A skill.
I think. So art versus science is language, and it's useful. And typically, what people are expressing. This is how I come up with my definitions, by the way, right? Is I try to think, when people say that, what are they typically talking about? Because there's always exceptions.
Well, and I think right after I said it, one of my hesitations is that science is a lot of like new frontiers and creativity, and you know that there's a rule, but maybe you're challenging the rule because maybe the rule is wrong and maybe the theory, like, so testing and hypotheses.
But that's not typically what people mean when they're talking about art versus science.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Just making sure. Yeah. No, because, I mean, both, it's a very arbitrary distinction, science and art. It just generally, the world does not break down into subject areas the way that we do it in school. Yeah. And the only reason that we all think of it like that is because that's how we do it in school. Yeah. And there's reasons that they chose to do it that way, you know, to be able to have teachers who are subject area, you know, content area experts, in addition to being experts at education. Although, unfortunately, a lot of that is not the case anymore. Meaning specifically that in many, if not most states, people can become high school teachers with a degree or a background in the subject area and no education in the act of being an educator.
Oh, wow.
So if you major in English, you can be a high school English teacher, even though you didn't study education or pedagogy or whatever. It's a matter of necessity. Not that many people study education, and most of the people who do are looking at the primary level, like K through whatever, or at the university level, academia. So in order to have enough high school teachers, I mean, there's a reason that there's like AmeriCorps and Teach for America, all these programs which are designed specifically to take people who didn't study it, put them into a volunteer program to kind of like rapidly train them how to be a teacher. Yeah. Way off of what I was starting on, but backing up subject area,
unnecessarily partitioned.
So Yeah, usually when people are using the phrase like it's more of an art than a science, or it's not a science or whatever, what they're meaning by that when they're referring to science in that phrase is this is a thing that you can learn a specific step-by-step process, do that specific step-by-step process, and get the outcome that you were predicting that you would get.
Yeah.
And when they say what they mean by the art is, you just kind of got to figure it out as you go along, and even evaluating whether you've done what you've wanted to do or not is kind of open to interpretation. It's very related to that phrase of like, we know it when we see it, kind of thing. Which, yeah, really any field that is cognitively oriented, like intellectually oriented, which generally what we would call science and what we would call the arts both fall into that category, are all about creativity and innovation. And part of the reason that science and STEM education, whatever, is so problematic, math in particular, is because it is taught as though it is something where you just follow the recipe and get the predictable desired outcome. But when you work in that field, that's fine for like when you're trying to teach somebody how to use algebra or whatever. It's not fine when you're trying to develop algebra.
No. It's the opposite.
Right. The people who specialize in anything, right, like city planning or whatever, understand it and deal with it on a level of detail that if they're doing anything of value involves all kinds of creativity and problem solving.
Yeah.
But we arbitrarily separate these things out. It's fun.
Is it the patriarchy? Just kidding.
I mean, you can always say everything's the patriarchy. Or the phrase I've seen, the kyriarchy. Have I ever shared that with you?
Tell me about it.
Somebody proposed this online, and I don't know how widespread it is or if I just happened to see something or whatever. I saw it online. The term kyriarchy, Kyriarchy, as a thing to encompass all of the the patriarchy and hierarchy and sexism and racism, like that combined all the power structures and dynamics all combined. We can use kyriarchy to just refer to it as like the power structures that are, but also are the things which maintain the way things are.
Is there any etymology to Kyrie?
There is.
Kyrie eleison? I used to sing about
that. There is, but it wouldn't be that because kyriarchy, unless I'm mistaken, but I'm pretty sure it's coming from the Greek roots, where Kyrie eleison is from Latin roots. Although there's a lot of overlap.
There's a lot of overlap, right?
Yeah. Is that Mozart's Unfinished?
Yeah, and I think it's also just a thing that you sing a lot when you sing about religion, and I think it's Bach. Yeah,
that Baroque period, because it's a psalm or a scripture that a bunch of different people from that period.
I'm very tempted to look it up now.
Good. It's a riddle. We don't like knowing that there's things that we don't know. But
is the wisdom that we'll never know the answer to the riddle, and it's just a...
Well, it depends on the kind of riddle.
Or does it?
Yeah, it does. well,
Lord have mercy. Kyrie eleison.
Yeah. I think I am not Catholic. My wife is, and her family is, and I've been to many services. But I believe that there's certain parts of the Catholic Mass which, like, there's a part of it where you sing the same words every time, but they just have many different melodies that can go with those words, so that every week you're singing something different. But I think it used to be more restricted, and now it's more flexible, but I don't really know for sure.
Well, so what were you saying that sometimes you don't know?
Usually as a call and response. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes.
The whole thing is very ritualistic, and I don't know it all, but it's easy enough to follow. When everyone stands up, you stand up. I'm sorry, what were you just asking?
I may have lost it. Oh, my joke about did I say something about never knowing the answer to any riddle or something like that?
Or that's the point of a riddle is is it the point to just accept that you can't know the answer?
Yeah, well, so couldn't you argue that our limited objectivity of consciousness makes essentially everything unknowable to a certain extent?
Yes.
But
technically, and I myself talk about that all the time. Technically, Now, the only exception I think to that, this is just what happens with Marie not being here, and it's fine, and I'm embracing it. Unless anybody else says something else, we're just talking our like esoteric philosophy and stuff. The way I think of it, the only thing which you can actually know is your own conscious experience.
Yeah.
Because no element, no individual data point or whatever regarding that exists beyond your observation of it. Mm-hmm. So your observation of your conscious experience is, by definition, 100% the total of your conscious experience. So you do know your own internal state, mm-hmm. which is hilarious to me that culturally, most people are very willing to embrace this idea that there's all kinds of stuff going on in here that I don't know. But then mm-hmm. externally, no, I know that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that goes into right and wrong too, like that in whatever, year you happen to exist on this planet, that these are the things that are right and these are the things that are known. Right. And then like 10 years, 50 years, 100 years later, it's like they didn't know anything.
See, right and wrong is a very interesting thing because the phrase, the way you were using it just now, would be like correct and correct version of right and wrong. Mm-hmm. But right and wrong also goes into like good and evil. Mm-hmm. And linking those two things, correct and incorrect versus good or sinful, mm-hmm. is a big problem in our culture.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's why everybody wants, anyway, some riddles,
yes. That makes a lot of sense why I would answer a question incorrectly in school and I would be like, I'm a sinner.
Yeah. I mean, oh, good. There's comments because I was about to say some stuff. I struggle with that in D&D because a lot of people I play with love puzzles, but I hate struggling with something and the solution might just not exist in my brain. Trying to find ways to design puzzles where they use D&D mechanics and are also fun and engaging. Ooh,
you're the D&D person. I don't know.
There's a legendary, it's just like almost a meme of a particular puzzle that DMs can use to torture their players. You know what a DM is?
Yeah, yeah. Okay. I actually have. Can I say I know people? Yeah, I know people who are DMs.
Well, I am, so you know.
Yeah, I know you. Of course,
the DM stands for Dungeon Master. I also enjoy playing, but I haven't played DMing is a version of playing. Anyway, the Dungeon Master is the person who designs and runs the world where each player runs their own character. Mm-hmm. So there's this kind of like known shared idea where players enter a room and there's nothing in the room except for a pedestal with a button on the top of it. And as soon as they enter the room, there's only one other exit and the door behind them shuts and locks and they can't get it open. And at the top of the room, some runes light up in green. And as time passes, each rune winks out. Mm-hmm. And eventually, when it gets to the next wall, they turn all of them yellow. Mm-hmm. And when it gets to the next wall, they all turn red as they wink out. And so the players are freaking out because it seems like a timer and whatever. Mm-hmm. And if they hit the button, the counter resets. Mm-hmm. So what'll end up happening is that the players spend forever, hitting the button and trying everything. Let's pick the locks. Let's see if there are secret doors. Let's try this spell,
Can I guess what the catch is?
What?
That you can just open the door and it's totally fine?
If the timer runs out, the doors unlock.
Oh, wow.
So depending on how much you describe it as the
DM. That's a little
DM,
malicious.
Right, that's why it's like a torture your players thing. Because you're giving all kinds of context clues which indicate, hey, this is bad if you let the timer run out.
Yeah.
It's kind of like when people approach a door where they need to get in and a bunch of people are standing there waiting and you think, oh, must be locked. Mm-hmm. So I'll just stand and wait too. And then it turns out someone else comes in and just goes in and you're like, oh, I could have checked all along. Okay. We read context. Contagion? Social contagion is a very interesting term as well.
Yeah.
Especially the way that it's being applied. The puzzle I was just saying. I think.
Cool.
Yeah. I mean, puzzles generally, the fun is in, riddles, right? Some are to accept that you can't, right? So like Zen koans, for example, the purpose of those is to acknowledge that they cannot be answered, but that the consideration of them is valuable in and of its own self.
Yeah, I was going to say that, just to go on record, I actually really don't like riddles. I don't like the idea of having a right answer that if you're just clever enough, you'll figure out. I like the idea of unanswerable questions, like what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's more philosophy than riddles, though, usually, yeah. Some riddles, like paradoxes, I think, exist as a way for us to explore the limitations of language.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, for example, this statement is not true,
mm-hmm.
which is a statement that cannot be parsed. Because if it's not true, well, then that would mean that it is true. But if it is true, then that would mean that it's not true.
Mm-hmm.
Those kinds of things, they don't have anything to do with the nature of our reality, but just, hey, look at this fun, like, limit in our
mm-hmm.
ability to have language and conceptualize things.
Yeah.
It is possible for us to come to a point where we cannot conceptualize a resolution that works with everything else that we already know.
There was something on a podcast recently. It was something like the limit of our ability to like intellectualize as modern man or whatever, that we should just like feel or be in our environment, that like there's a wisdom in just being instead of, it was better than that. Ugh.
Well, I didn't quite follow. I was reading a comment too.
What does it say?
Well, I want to know more about what you're saying. What is this?
I feel like it relates to the koans and the riddles and intellectualizing and believing that there's something to know, that there's also just another option, which is just to like be and feel, and that's it. Like you don't have to.
Yeah. Well, that does play into this comment here from my dad. I sense a contradiction. A spiritualist, my term, says, I know that God exists. A humanist says, I know that you cannot know. Sophistry reasoning can prove sophistry/reasoning can prove the validity of either position.
I need to read it again.
Yeah, so that is all about language.
Yeah, that sounds very.
What do we mean by no?
Yeah.
What do we mean by prove? What do we mean by validity?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not trying to do the thing of like, what do we mean by it? You know, like
mm-hmm.
some things have, it's not about there being a correct meaning because there is no such thing. But some things we can confidently say people generally mean this thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we can confidently assume. We still might be wrong, but it's not worth acting as though we can't assume that we can all agree what contradiction means, for example, there. So validity, especially in the therapy world, is a big word. What do you think about that term?
Oh my gosh. What do you think about that term, Brandon?
That it's a problematic term?
I would say it's mostly BS.
Sure.
I think people usually use it in the context of belittling themselves in some ways.
What do you mean?
Like, I know I feel this way, but it's not valid, or I have had this experience, but am I just being too dramatic? Is it too, like, is it...
Sure, but it also gets used with
it?
Like, oh, that's a really validating experience, or I feel very validated.
Yeah, no, I agree, but I think a lot of people I know who use that word with themselves are usually doing it in some sort of negative way.
Sure.
Versus like, I am incredibly valid.
Valid typically means understandable.
Mm-hmm.
And it's problematic. It's problematic because it also can mean true.
Mm-hmm.
For a theory to be valid, you know. But valid just means understandable in the therapeutic context and in the way that people mostly use it, right? Your experiences are valid just means that what you're experiencing is understandable, that were I or anyone else to have experienced exactly what you would have experienced, we would also be feeling the way that you're feeling or thinking the thing that you're thinking.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of more or less a way of making it so that people don't feel as though they're doing something wrong.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that what they're doing is right either, because those things don't really matter. So yes, either of those arguments can be valid in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
But no, like in that first one, I know that God exists. Well, what does a person mean by know in that statement?
I would think of that as more experiential, like in their conscious experience, whatever they define as God, they feel exists. That it would be more of like a feeling.
Yeah, well,
like, I know that God exists almost sounds like for every human being on this planet, God exists.
Well, that is what people generally mean by it, is what they're saying is whether you believe in God or not,
invalidating them.
Well, yeah, in a sense, right? Like, because I believe God exists is a fully valid statement, means pretty much the same thing regarding that person's own experience. So in this case, no is mostly used as a more intense version of belief.
Yeah.
I believe that God exists so strongly that I am stating that it is a fact. Problem is that fact is a thing which requires empirical evidence. Like, that's the concept of what a fact is. So that can't be a fact because it doesn't have empirical evidence. It's just a way of people, more intensely expressing their belief. I think some people,
wouldn't they disagree though? Like, they would say there's written accounts of it or something like that, or they have some sort of...
A written account of a thing's not a fact, though.
Yeah.
I
think you could piss some people off saying things like that.
Well, so the written account is a fact.
That it exists.
But that written account would imply a thing, which is not in and of itself a fact. Just like, and saying something's not a fact also doesn't mean it's not true either, right? Like, I can say, I love my wife. That's not a fact. I can't provide empirical evidence because the definition of love is nebulous at best. And based on some people's definition of it, they could then point to evidence which suggests that I don't by that definition.
Yeah.
So, but I don't care. And in this particular case, like when it comes to believing in God and religion, whatever, we're really just being philosophical today.
What's so bad about that, Brandon? I feel like you're getting stuck in a binary.
It's not that it's bad, obviously, and we are leaning into it. It is a thing that makes me, when I notice it, I become concerned because I believe, with some reason to believe this, that there are times where I enjoy that and I am talking about that in ways which are valuable and make sense to me, but that other people think are inaccessible or unnecessary or whatever. So because I am concerned about my imagination of what the viewers who are not talking in the chat might be and what they might be interested in, that's where it's coming.
Well, what about the viewers who are chatting?
Yeah, well, that's why I'm going with it, and mostly you, because I have the most information about you. But it does still call my attention back to, like, oh, am I being too esoteric and whatever?
I don't know. I think there's lots of people who like, I don't know.
Yeah, there are.
I'm gonna see if I can.
I like it. You like it.
Sign
Lots
into
of
the stream so I can read the comments on my phone.
Oh, good idea.
If that's possible.
Yeah, I know that you cannot know. It's, again, with these riddles, a lot of them are just explorations of language. Like, a whole category of riddles is like, what is at the beginning of the end and the end of the middle and the middle of the beginning is the letter E, right? So to me, that's a way that we are kind of calling attention to and playing around with the relationship of language and the written word and whatever to the way that we think about things. It's kind of a funny thing to point out. And B, it's also kind of a way of teaching and reinforcing for ourselves and for each other, like, remember that words are words, not the actual things that the words represent. It's kind of like that Magritte painting, This Is Not a Pipe.
I don't know.
Oh,
I feel like I've heard of it.
I think it's Magritte, but it's just a painting, a very, like, realistic looking depiction of a meerschaum pipe.
Oh, okay.
But the title of the piece is in French, This Is Not a Pipe, which to me, and I think what the generally accepted idea is that he's pointing out that this is just colors on paper. This isn't the thing which it represents and evokes in your mind. And it's a strange experience to have that reminded of you, like when you're looking at art, to be reminded that this thing is not the thing that it looks like it is. The thing that I am thinking that it is when I see it is not what it actually is. I like to think of that particular one as going even further, which is to say that even if it were a pipe, that's not what it is. That's a label that we have assigned to it, which is useful, but what exactly makes something a pipe is, talking about riddles. There's like a question in linguistics of chair is the word that typically gets used. Define chair in such a way which encompasses all things which are chairs and excludes all things which are not chairs. And kind of the point of this one, yes, is that it can't be done. Because people think that there are correct and incorrect definitions, but as soon as you point it to them like that, even with something simple and observable like chair, as soon as people engage in the exercise, it becomes very clear very quickly, no, there is no such thing. Context matters and perception matters. Because people will try, oh, that's easy. It's a thing you sit on. Okay, what about a bench? Okay, fine. It's a thing you sit on that is meant for one person to sit on. Okay, what about a motorcycle? Okay, it's a thing you sit on for one person and it has 4 legs. Okay, what about a horse? You know, like you just keep, which is the thing I do in therapy quite a bit, actually. Especially when I find people using a concept that is harmful to them. I'm not trying to point out that it's a ridiculous concept, but I am trying to point out that no matter what the concept is, it doesn't have an actual like 100% definition. So the way that they are thinking of it and applying it isn't correct. It may be accurate and it may be useful, or it may be accurate and not harmful, but it's worth exploring. So when I say things like, well, do you want X? You've been on the receiving end of this sometimes.
Oh my God.
What elements of X do you want? You know, what about X is it that you want?
And then it's always like, what do you mean by want? Let's define
Sometimes
want.
we go into that too. But we can start with like, if a client says, I want to do it. That's a phrase a lot of clients have said to me over the years.
And it does relate to like
I just don't want to do it.
And executive
oh, for sure. I mean, we get those kinds of questions online all the time. I'm procrastinating, which is a version of I want to do it, but I don't. I just can't get myself to want to do it. So we say, well, what do you mean by want sometimes? Or another way to say it is, well, what is it about it that you want? Well, you know, it's for a grade and I want to get good grades. Okay, so you want good grades. Yeah. Well, is there any way to get good grades without doing this thing? Yeah, but okay, well then that's not the only reason you want to do it. There must be some other element as well.
Does it turn into shoulds then?
Usually it's revealing to somebody that they're dealing with shoulds, whether they're saying it that way or not. But there's always reason, and should isn't bad either. Should is usually used when people are referring to, I have the idea that it would be beneficial if I did this thing. Sometimes I have that idea because other people have told me that idea, and I don't agree with it or understand it, but I do still believe those people. Sometimes it just means, no, I think they're wrong, and I think they will be happy if I do it, so I want to do it anyway. And sometimes it means, yes, they're right. And sometimes it's things that I come up with on my own. If I do this, I should, whatever. I should really run payroll today. It is not necessary that payroll be done today.
But if anyone asks me an interesting question,
what do you mean?
It's not going to happen.
Oh, yeah, no, that's everything gets. Because talking, honestly, I do also think it's the most valuable and important part of my job. You know, like, and the payroll just needs to be run in time for people's pay to be. Today's the first day I can run it, but I can run it 10 days from now and it will still get processed on time.
Then why do you use the word should, Brandon?
Well, it was an example of times where we say it to ourselves. I think it would be beneficial if I did. In this case, part of it is then I don't have to do it later. But part of it is that there are other things that I would like to be able to do sooner than later that will be problematic if they're not done by a certain point. And those things I can't do until after I run the payroll first. Do some calculations on some things. Anyway, we're going off on a billion different things.
And I still can't read the comments, and my phone told me
I relate to that so hard, and I want to do so many things. Oh, wait, I missed one. I hate riddles that act like there's only one right answer, but there's really not. Maybe that's the answer. I also struggle with adding puzzles in D&D because there's rarely a place where it actually makes sense to have a puzzle. Maybe I'll have a sphinx that gives a riddle and you win if you communicate with your teammates and learn something from it. That's fair, although I would also say the only reason it would make sense to have a puzzle at any point is because someone has put it there, or to design environmental puzzles, which are also super fun. Where it's not a riddle, but it's like they need to get to the top of this cliffside, figure it out. I haven't designed the solution. I've just presented you with a problem. But the same thing could be said about combat, right? Like the only reason that combat makes sense into any D&D adventure you're putting in is because you designed it in a way where the combat makes sense. Most of us go through our daily life without engaging in combat ever in our entire life. It's not we're solving puzzles and figuring things out is much more commonly used.
Yeah.
But that's also part of why the combat is a focus in D&D, is because it is a thing we don't get to do in real life. As well as when you're playing a character, your character is supposed to know different things than you, right? Like I could play a character who's unintelligent by academic, D&D standards of intelligence is very much typical academic, a low intelligence character struggles with reading and whatever, right? So then how do I play, like if I, Brandon, am solving the riddle and having fun with it, but my character theoretically is somebody who wouldn't be solving it, then it gets difficult. Anyway.
I feel like if I started playing D&D, it would take over my life because I would love it so much.
Well, then you should.
So I must deny myself the pleasure.
Well, that's a whole topic. There's a very relevant to neurodivergent people.
It is very relevant.
I can't do things I like because that's bad to like things.
Well, they'll say something like, I can't do things I like because they won't say because it's bad to like things. They'll say something like, I'll get so distracted by it that I won't then do the things I should do, or
I have an addictive personality.
Yeah.
Or it shouldn't be that easy. Or I don't think it's fair. Or for me to have that advantage, or for me to have that experience when other people don't. Or I'm not sure that things are bad enough. I'm thinking of like ADHD medication. People say, I don't know that I need it. I've had clients who will take ADHD or any kind of medication, benefit from it, and then stop and say it made things too easy. It's like, what, you don't want that, right? Like there is a belief in our culture that struggle is good. No pain, no gain. Hard work is just a phrase that means struggle and suffering.
I don't know anyone who works too hard.
That was a reference to Caitlin herself.
Satire. Well, I was thinking about family too.
I wonder why you may have the same beliefs then.
I wonder.
Anyway, we're going all over the place. What were we talking about?
So many things. I like the comments. I don't know.
Yeah, the comments are fun.
Or do you want to pretend to be Marie?
We're going to do a TTRPG group. I just need a therapist who wants to run it.
What do you mean by run? Do you mean co-run? Or do you mean run?
Kind of.
Like you would
this
be
particular
around?
Group, no. That's why I can't do it, because I can't run the group myself, because it's at evenings and afternoons. And I have kids. I can't be doing that. Not that people without kids, blah, blah. I'm just when I didn't have children, I liked working at night. I would rather have my work day start later and end later. Yeah, nice. And I don't do that anymore. Yeah. I'm even designing our own.
How about if you do a support group for all of my clients that would love doing a support group, then I will do a TTR...
Tabletop role-playing game. TTRPG? Dungeons and Dragons is the kind of like archetype, but the type of game it is a tabletop role-playing game, TTRPG. And no, I'm not going to do that.
Oh.
Not because I wouldn't do a support group. I might theoretically do a support group. But the point of this group, as with everything else, is that it's got to be done by somebody who's wanting to do it, not somebody who's doing it in exchange for a bargain of some kind, Anyway.
That's so funny.
And yes, they're awesome. And there's a reason that neurodivergent people tend to love these things so much, for sure. And you probably would love it. And you should give it a shot.
I just can't be happy.
Could make a whole career off of just being a live stream TTRPG person.
Oh, no.
That's a thing.
It's a thing.
A very successful thing for some people. I'm all over the place. Rubik's Cube rejection.
What does that mean?
I don't know. I'm fidgeting with the Rubik's Cube.
Rejection maybe is in the ASMR?
I don't know if I rejected you with it. I don't know what it's referenced to. Oh yeah, you would love painting miniatures. Then you'll get really into miniatures, and then you'll learn to paint your own miniatures. Oh, I threw the Rubik's Cube on the ground. meaning I probably dropped it.
Yeah.
These ones, they pop out if you hit it too hard. Give me some. I feel so unfocused, which is fine. I enjoy it. But especially when on stream, I like to feel like I'm providing something.
Well, I'm just curious why this is not in that category of things you just asked, but I'm curious why there's this like attitude about talking about philosophical things. I almost feel like it's like an Achilles heel that if you just stopped worrying about it, that maybe it would make everything better.
It might.
Have you gotten direct feedback when people are like, we lost you when you started going into that or something?
Yes. But, you know, as with all these things, philosophical or esoteric, or, you know, these words, what exactly do they mean and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, I've gotten feedback from people that, well, here's a version you have definitely heard around the office a lot. I just need a practical answer. I don't need a long.
I guess one of the reasons I wanted to join this stream is I feel like it's just like pontification or something.
Do you have advice for if you only kind of get along with your TTRPG group? Yes. Either find a different TTRPG group or work on getting along with them better. But I know those are both very generic things. What's the specific? Only kind of getting along is a phrase that is being used here to encapsulate a set of experiences. Some of which are experiences you enjoy. That's the kind of getting along part. Some of which are experiences you don't enjoy, which is why it's only kind of, not just getting along. So my question then would be, we don't need to focus on changing the parts that you enjoy. What are the things that are happening that you don't want it to be that way? Either ways that you're thinking or feeling, or perceptions or worries that you have that the other people might be thinking or feeling in response to you. You don't have to put this stuff, but if you want, we can actually explore that question. Say this is a group of people you don't know super well and you only meet up once a week. Well, now you're still not describing what the problem is. You're all kind of playing your own game. Okay, there we go. We're starting to get there. You don't know very well and you meet up once per week. That's the etiology. That's your explanation of why the problem exists. The thing that is the problem is happening because we don't know each other well and we only get together once a week. We're all kind of playing our own game. Now that's a description of the problem, but it's still a very vague one. And I can make an assumption. I can make a bunch of assumptions about what exactly you mean. But part of the utility here is in giving you reason to explore it in a more specific way. Because something that happens with neurodivergent people, quote unquote intelligent people, former gifted kid, blah, blah, like just generally people interested in mental health and all philosophy. There's so much utility in having general descriptors of things to say that this specific thing is an example of whatever, narcissism. This is an example of triangulation. Because once I can say, if I can think of it as I have accurately identified this as triangulation, then I reference, well, what is triangulation? Why does it happen? What can be done about it? And then using that model, I can then come back to applying something specific to this triangulation. The problem is that we lose track of that's why it's useful. And we start to think that some things are triangulation and some things are not, as opposed to some things, it's helpful if we think of them in this way because it guides the way we would interact with it, and some things it isn't. So we get into situations like this. We're kind of playing your own game, which I have a lot of assumptions about what that means, but it means nothing specific.
I think there's another comment.
Sure. I think everyone's still a little awkward with each other. That's the reasoning. Honestly, I hate that we play online and never use cameras. That's also partly some reasoning, but part of what you don't like. Because I can't see people's faces and that makes me uncomfortable. So maybe that's a good part of it. So this is what happens when we force people to be descriptive and observable, is you have to boil down to what is the actual thing that's happening, because then nothing is mystical anymore. When it's how do I get along with people that I don't get along with, that's very mystical. You know, we can give a lot of expert advice that doesn't really mean anything, but maybe it'll inspire you and you'll translate it in some way and whatever. But if we get down to the specifics, we'll eventually get to, well, really it's just nobody turns on their cameras, and I don't like that, but I don't feel comfortable saying that I would like us to turn on cameras. And then it's a specific thing that we can do. And I mean, there's other things probably too. You're clear that that's a good part of it. Means I think there's other parts of it that I also don't like, that I'm kind of lumping into this we're playing our own game thing. But see, right there, if I had made assumptions about we're kind of playing our own game, the assumptions I was making in my head were things like, okay, some people who play D&D are very interested in the mechanics of it, and they're wanting to do the combat and be very clever, and it's almost like a board game. Mm-hmm. Some people who play D&D are very into the role-playing element of it. Mm-hmm. And some people, there are different things that people enjoy. So my initial assumption was that it was a group of people who all enjoy different elements of it and are therefore kind of trying to play it in the way that they enjoy, which isn't the way that everyone else enjoys. Yeah. Now, with a little more detail, I'm rethinking and saying it seems like maybe what you're referring to is just feeling isolated from the other members of your group. Like we are all separate from one another as we play. Yeah. I'll read it out loud because I can't read it. At least one person doesn't have a camera, and it's also hard for people's computers to have Roll20 and a bunch of cameras running at the same time. Sure. And of course, there are things besides Roll20 to use that might be better suited for people's computers. And perhaps you would like to have your camera on, but aren't doing that because no one else has theirs on, and worry that if you were to turn yours on, it would make people feel pressured to have to turn theirs on or make them uncomfortable. That rather than saying out loud what you think and what you would like, you're making a bunch of assumptions based on context, which are valid assumptions and may very well be accurate about what other people would like and what would make them comfortable and uncomfortable. But it still leaves you in a position where you don't feel like you can say out loud the thing that you are thinking, which is, I wish we all could turn our cameras on. Now, we could go a different way, and I could say, what is it about the idea of having the cameras on that's appealing to you? Yeah. Because if you answer that question, then we can say, well, is there any other thing that can be done to try and get toward that without turning the cameras on? Or we can say, well, what would it entail? How costly would it be for you to find a group of people who plays with their cameras on as opposed to this group of people? Maybe these are, you said you don't really know. I'm just speaking theoretically. It could be your childhood friends, and finding a different group is a big deal. Or it could be that the idea of finding a new group is scary and intimidating, even though this group isn't that particularly important. Or maybe you love the character and want to see how the story goes, or whatever. But this is the point, is that people are looking for, this isn't a comment about you on the stream. You're throwing things out there which are very useful, and then we can go back and forth. But generally in our culture, people are throwing out these questions that are very generic. They're not observable. Yeah. What do you do with a child who is oppositional? And then expecting answers. And so there are many people who are happy to provide answers. Yeah. Well, with an oppositional child, you should blank, 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 blank. What? Each of those children is different. Each of the people asking that question is different, including what the hell they even mean by calling the child oppositional in the first place. Yeah. Of course, there's nothing we can recommend that's going to work in all of those cases. And I think it's kind of irresponsible of people to act as though it's fine to say, look, there's specifics and we don't know, but here's some generic things you might want to consider or think about or try or pay attention to. Yeah. Or here's some things which commonly have helped or that other people in the situation have utilized. But that doesn't sell as well as saying, here is what you do. I know how to solve the problem. Yeah. And I do think that's irresponsible for people to say it that way.
And people are really incentivized to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
They make a lot more money. Their editors are telling them to do it that way, and / the people who are okay with doing it that way or inclined to doing it that way or whatever tend to be the ones that end up with the biggest audiences anyway, because they're pushing things, So it's not necessarily someone becoming willing to do it. It's also a survivorship bias thing. Still feels, to be fair, 3 of the 5 people know each other very well, but it still feels like everyone is very self-conscious about their decisions in the game. Huh. Oh, that's interesting.
That seems like another element.
Who's the DM? Are you the DM? While I wait for that, because there's a delay. While I wait for the response. Oh, honestly, I put it out as a vague player. Okay. I put it as a vague question because I figured it could help promote a conversation. No, that's fair. That's why I said I appreciate you doing it on the stream here. One of the three that knows each other well is the DM.
Okay.
So a lot of this is on the DM more, or at least they're in a position to be able to address it more easily. If you have a good relationship with the DM, that's a good way to go about it, is to talk to the DM and get them involved. Otherwise, you can do it differently. And this relates, talking about promoting conversations, this relates a lot to sports for me, and the way that people talk about sports as like, oh, it's good for kids to play sports because they learn how to be a part of a team and work together and whatever. When the reality of it is that is not the case. Usually. Yeah. Especially as things get more intense, you know, as the kids get older and the competition becomes more important, that the outcome matter. Well, what ends up happening is that when a person makes a mistake, they feel like utter garbage.
Yeah.
They feel like they let their teammates down. And yes, when a person has an amazing like game-winning play or whatever, they feel great. But the only reason they feel great about that is also not because of, hey, I'm a part of a team, but as in, I am the one who made it so that all my friends and the people that I care about on this team are so happy.
So sort of like the star player or like the star moment?
Sure, and the star player also feels like utter garbage whenever they make a mistake, including that eventually people will start saying things like, I didn't do well enough. Not an identifiable mistake that I made, but I'm the star.
Magic.
Right. And it's not just sports, because wink, wink, Caitlin, you and me, and you know, but oh, I'm so good at helping people in this way, and it feels great when I help them. But then if they're not immediately and magically helped by the things that I'm doing, and then I say, oh, I should do more, I should do better. So that kind of self-consciousness is what sports tends to promote, as well as the academic, because that's where you and I got it, and the performance, you and I got it also there. Oh, I'm the star, but that also means you better not screw up, you know. I
think I used to say the higher the pedestal you're on, the farther you can fall or whatever.
Sure.
That's how it feels.
So if these players are self-conscious about their decisions in the game, and I'm again making assumptions based on the language, but the language about their decisions in the game, not about their physical appearance when the camera is on or whatever. I would imagine then that means that the DM is running a game that has a style of enforcing consequences on player decisions that are realistic, right? Which is a valid, it's not my personal favorite style of play, but that is a totally valid way, is to say, my job is to facilitate this world and this universe and allow you to make your decisions. And if you make decisions that would logically lead to an outcome that you don't want, if I change that, it takes away the stakes and whatever, right? I don't trust men that wear the capris. That's fair, I suppose. I like them. They're comfy and they're lightweight and it's hot.
I was just thinking about buying more capris the other day. So. They're a great invention.
Fortunately, I'm not asking anyone to trust me. Why I explain everything behind everything I'm saying. Hey, you're running Descent into Avernus? That I did that. That was a fun one. We're trying to save a city that has been drawn into hell. Consequences are running pretty hot. We're floating in the sky above a river of lava. I know exactly what you're talking about. And that is a fun module. So it likely suggests that the DM is running that kind of a game, which is a fine thing to do, but then also means that people are still playing the game as though there's a correct and incorrect choice to make. Which D&D does not work very well that way.
So that could be contributing to the...
Right. What people are trying to do is make the optimal decision, and they're worried about messing anything up. But the reason that D&D or TTRPGs generally are fun is because it's communal storytelling, right? Like whatever happens, well, then something else is going to happen next, and then something else. And sometimes the thing that happens next is different than what you or the other players or all of you together wanted it to be. But a game where nothing ever happens that isn't what you want it to be would be pretty boring. So if the focus can be shifted onto having an enjoyable time playing the game. Descendant of Verse, I'm playing a 523-year-old elven grave cleric of Kellenbar. It's very fun. I have lots of stories about that particular module. It is very fun. It's like a very Mad Max, doesn't matter.
Ah,
Anyway, we got to get wrapping up soon. Yeah.
It sounds so exciting.
It is very
And I've seen people in much joy talking about it. So I feel like it's real.
Yeah, it's super fun.
Yeah.
Not
I feel like
everybody. It's something you have to embrace,
Mm-hmm.
If you're self-conscious going in, you can make the other people self-conscious too. We're all very concerned about the lives of the NPCs, the non-player characters, the people who populate the game world.
Mm-hmm.
So we worry a lot about how our actions might accidentally kill people. Oh, it sounds like a great game for Caitlin. Very moral philosophy.
Thank you so much, Brandon.
Yeah, well, especially in that particular module, bunches of people have already died by the time you've gotten to the point that you're at right now. That's kind of the point. It is bleak and dark.
Aww.
Yeah, I mean, you're going into hell, to try and...
Oh my god, that sounds so exciting.
Most of it takes place on the first layer of the 9 levels of hell.
Wow.
Yeah. I have it in... No, I think I lent it to a client.
I smell the beginning of a special interest. I can't do it.
No. Yeah, it's like... Think of it like... Did you ever do improv?
No, I was so busy doing music. Improv music. But...
When someone is self-conscious, it makes everyone else feel self-conscious.
Mm-hmm.
Because when someone's self-conscious, they're judging themselves, which really means they're worried that other people are judging them.
Sounds like social contagion.
We should talk about that word. That phrase. And so if you and I are both like, hey, let's do our best Australian accents right now.
Mm-hmm. And then we're like...
And you jump in and you start doing it great. And then I'm like really hesitant and feeling super embarrassed. Then it's likely to make you feel, oh gosh, I shouldn't have been so eager to jump. I should pretend like, especially for neurodivergent people who are like, oh, I'm not supposed to like this so much. I feel more confident around the self-conscious. I feed off of their weakness. Fair enough too. Okay. These are interesting comments.
We have 1 minute.
I know. Oh, shoot. I forgot what I was saying.
I really appreciate all the, what is it called? Interaction? Engagement?
Yeah, it's been nice.
Engagement.
All of them, really.
Oh.
All right. How about this? Because we got to get going. There's a term in clown work. What? You're laughing because I've done clown work? Which I have.
No, yes. I'm laughing because I feel like what you're about to say will take definitely more than 60 seconds if you're about to
There's a term called taking the drop.
Taking the drop.
Taking the drop. Taking the drop. Clowning is about failure. Like clown routines. Clowns they're always attempting something and they're constantly failing. They're trying to put out the fire, but it's a bunch of confetti comes out of the bucket.
Yeah.
So taking the drop is a reference to embracing that failure rather than being embarrassed by it, experiencing it the way that the audience is experiencing it, being surprised by it and then saying, okay, well that happened and now what do I try? Because that's what the audience is doing. Oh, that didn't work. What are they going to do next? Instead of being like, oh shoot, I messed it up, whatever. Because if you act that way, then everyone feels bad about being gleeful.
And then you're not a clown anymore.
Then you're sad, which is why the sad clown exists. One of the instructor that I studied some clowning under, there were 2 different ones. And he was a great clown. He had an incredible routine of a clown trying to commit suicide for like 10 minutes and just every attempt failing.
Wow.
And it's hilarious and tragic.
Wow.
Yes, clown work is a fun phrase. Anyway, take the drop. Depending on what character you're playing in, it sounds like, based on assumptions and prejudices I have about clerics and elves and the people who choose to play those things, sounds like it could be a character that takes themselves seriously. But if not, or if you can find some other way to work it in, or if the character can't take the drop, but you, the player, can, meaning take a risk, try something, and if and when it fails, take the drop, embrace it, enjoy it. You made an attempt that failed. That's interesting and funny, and now you do another thing.
So then if if they take the drop, then the people around them will be more likely to take the drop, and then the game will become less neurotic?
Well, yes, I do think that's true. If you take the drop, the people around you can enjoy your failure, as opposed to, like, part of the self-consciousness is if you fail and then you feel bad, then I'm like, oh, shoot, how? Like, how do you feel when you're hanging out with a bunch of people and you know one of them feels bad? Even if you're like, they shouldn't feel bad. There's nothing wrong with it. Right?
It's social contagion.
It's hard to like talk about it, whatever.
Yeah.
But if they mess up and they're like, oh, yep, there you go, or whatever, then it's easier for me to enjoy it in that way. And then, yes, as a knock-on effect, it's easier for me to take risks. Because the best D&D stories are not when everything goes according to plan, usually.
Well, isn't that usually the trickster element in archetypal stories? Yes, I still can't read.
We need to get wrapping up, but also, so this person had asked last week about supporting a child with speech delay. We did not talk about that today, so they say I totally spaced. Did you already support it? Did you directly address it today? So I guess it's a good thing that we also spaced it with Marie out today. I forgot about that.
Me too. I'm sorry.
And we can come back to that next week. We can talk about that next time. And it would be helpful, G31, if you're there, because part of what we have been talking about today is the general of a thing, including like supporting a child with speech delay. Mm-hmm. We can say some things, but it's easier. You can be much more impactful when you have more specific information. So if you're here and I can ask questions about the child and what you're talking about and what resources and experiences you have, then we can do a lot more.
Yeah, very helpful.
But thank you for bringing that back. And I will remind Marie as soon as we wrap up about that question from last week. And we're having a stream next week. Let's plan on doing it in 2 weeks, because next week I'm going to be out of the office and I'm still intending to do the stream, but I'll be at a place with spotty Wi-Fi and stuff. So why don't we plan for that one for 2 weeks? Help me remember, communicate this to Marie. Yeah. We'll do speech delays in 2 weeks. And next week we'll still do the stream theoretically, but just in case it craps out or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, that's reasonable.
Cool.
Well, this was such a fun journey. I'm picturing people like biking around in circles, kind of like
the clowning image is just
there we go. We're juggling on tricycles in clown costumes, going in circles.
Put a thing in front of me that I want to understand. I'm going to focus on it, and then you put the next thing in front of me. Oh, let me talk about that one.
And you'll say, "What do you mean by that? What does that word mean?"
That's a very useful question.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you all.
Good
to be with you. Thank you, Caitlin. Yes. Good to be with you. This was fun having so much in the chat.
Yeah, it was. I loved it.
I hope to see you all next week.
Thank you.